Hi guys, so I figure I want to try using this video format and see if it's a little bit easier and pretty fun still. Today I would love to talk about this idea of perfectionism. Now, I had a really extensive conversation with one of my clients, and ultimately it came down to the question of, is perfectionism good in sport? Is it helpful? Is it productive? Is it overall gonna get you to where you want to go? So that's kind of what we're gonna dive into today. Now, the first part of this video, we're gonna outline exactly what is perfectionism. We'll give it the clinical definition as well as the anecdotal definition, kind of what we all think of as athletes or coaches as to what perfectionism is. And then afterwards, we're gonna talk about the origins of the term or the idea itself. Now, this is going to be very important when we talk about, is there a benefit to perfectionism? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? And also, how does it manifest itself within individuals? And then afterwards, I'm going to kind of go over what we can do as coaches, parents, even athletes. What can we do to identify certain traits of, somebody, if they have perfectionism or not? I think this is going to be very helpful to help athletes and to also manage team dynamics too, because that does play in a huge role with how a team will develop and also how they just evolve and manage around one individual. And then lastly, for the outline, I want to give you at least 4 simple tips that you can use if you're a coach or if you're an athlete to help cope or to mitigate some of the negative effects of perfectionism, and what we can do to learn from it and also to kind of grow from it as well. So hopefully this video is going to outline all those key points. So let's start off with the definition. What exactly is perfectionism? Well, kind of based off of the research, but also a little bit of my experiences in talking with other athletes, it has a couple different layers to it. So we can say it's multi-dimensional, okay? There's not just one aspect that makes it perfectionism. There's a couple different things. I wrote out a couple. First one was kind of the overall pursuit of extremely high standards. The person is inflexible for change and is committed to flawlessness. Now, this often leads into setting unrealistic goals or expectations and creating a lot of pressure on themselves or with coaches and or teammates as well. A lot of the other things that can arise from this is irrational thinking. This is a really big part of it, and also harsh self-critical evaluation. So oftentimes when an athlete is looking at themselves in a healthy situation, they're able to acknowledge any faults, and then they can learn and adapt. However, individuals who are exhibiting perfectionism oftentimes are purely negative, nothing really productive, and this really can affect their overall emotional state as well as affect the team around them. And then lastly, their self-worth is tied up with their accomplishments. So I'm just going to give you a personal example. Me coming from a background of archery, and I see this all the time in archery, in golf, and a lot of individual sports, that an athlete will work very hard on being perfect with their form and technique, okay? They spend hours upon hours upon hours working on their craft. Now, what can happen is that during a tournament, with all that work, they set this expectation. It's like, okay, I need to perform this way. I need to be this flawless. I need to do this, that, and the other thing. And let's say something doesn't go as planned. It could be just a bad day, or you got caught up in the moment, whatever. Again, a lot of different reasons to examine that. What's gonna happen is that the individual is gonna see the results on a scorecard, okay? They're gonna see numbers on a paper, and those numbers are gonna dictate how they feel. Okay, they interpret that information and they process it in a negative light. And so they really wrap up their self-worth on just, again, simple numbers or result on a piece of paper. And that's really an extreme way to perform as an athlete, but also just to live. And I think it's kind of the duty as coaches and professionals to really look at, how can we create balance within an athlete and just overall well-being. Now, the history of the term perfectionism. Well, it can date all the way back towards Freud. Now, Freud often said that it's kind of a symptom of, what do they say down here? Obsessive behavior. It wasn't until his contemporaries, the contemporaries of Freud, Alfred Adler and Karen Horney, they had proposed that perfectionism was seeking validation from others. Now, this is a really big paradigm shift. When Freud said perfectionism is, impulsive behavior internally, what Adler and Horney were talking about was perfectionism is a result of trying to please others or trying to be accepted by others. And this was a big shift because now the person is externally motivated to perform at peak rather than internally motivated as we commonly thought of before. More recent writings have stated that perfectionism is a personality trait and that we actually all possess some form of it in one capacity or another. We all have the ability. McIntyre and 𝗤𝗏𝗍 kind of brought that out back in a study in 1997. It's a little bit older, but it's still a great read if you ever want to. I have a link down below. However, more and more research has found that athletes are more susceptible to this occurrence, and this mainly has to do with the environment that brings out a competitive nature or wanting to be the best in something. There was a really interesting study by 𝗥𝗲𝗍𝗰𝗁𝗀𝗀𝗀 and colleagues in 2010 where they used 187 youth athletes, and what they did is that they compared youth athletes to non-athletes, and they wanted to measure what the overall perception of achievement or excellence was, and they found out that the non-competitive group or the students who did not compete in any sports showed lower levels of goal-seeking behavior versus the athletes who showed a significant higher amount of striving for excellence and mastery. So that's just to give you a little bit of context, and environment does breed competitive nature in sports. So it's kind of natural that we have athletes who show this more often. And as coaches, well, we're kind of guilty by encouraging such behavior too. So let's go back to our question. Is perfectionism in sports a good thing or is it a negative thing? Well, some researchers propose that there are many benefits of perfectionism. First, I kind of listed off. First is a constant strive towards mastery. So they're consistently working on their craft. They build a strong habit, and there seems to be a higher amount of energy or willingness to do something. Again, it's striving for that excellence, that unyielding presence about them. Also too, that they are strong goal setting attributes. So they have this tendency to want to set goals very, very high and create standards for themselves, but also for others. And we'll talk a little bit about this when we get into some extreme examples with professional sports as well. Owens and Slade back in 2008 had deemed this term a positive perfectionism. And they said that, if we can harness the positive effects of perfectionism, this can actually be a good thing for developmental of youth in any type of sport. There has been strong evidence, however, against this idea of positive perfectionism. Many researchers have found out that setting up parameters for acceptance or excellence or encouraging perfectionism often lends the athlete, especially a youth athlete, to set acceptance under certain conditions. If you perform this way, then as a coach, I can accept you or I can appreciate you. Even as fans, we do it naturally. Parents do this as well. So if you're a parent and you're kind of watching, be very, very careful with how we're accepting or how we're acknowledging certain behaviors. And they often cited that, within the studies, they often cited that many side effects of trying to encourage perfectionism is anxiety, depression, and a low self-affect. So going back to our archery example, there was many times to where, let's say if I didn't perform at my best and I saw that I got a certain score on a scorecard, well, I was depressed because I didn't believe that I had either worked hard enough or that was below my standard. And it really did affect me negatively. And I've seen this so many times with so many clients that they get wrapped up with just pure results and how they view themselves as an individual based off of, if they placed well, if they got a shiny plastic cup or not. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we have to be realistic as, coaches and athletes alike, and parents too. So some of you might be thinking, well, what about examples like Michael Jordan or Peyton Manning, for example? People who demand a certain amount of excellence, and as you can be around that person, you want to strive for excellence as well. There's a tone, there's a standard that's set by these individuals. Coming from Denver originally, I've extensively listened to and even got a chance to talk to some players about some of the stories that they've said or encountered with Peyton Manning and kind of his rigorous schedule. And oftentimes we praise these athletes for such actions. However, working in a team setting, in a team dynamic, more often than not, this can actually be a negative consequence as well. Because if the rest of the team do not understand or are not under the same premise as the individual when it comes to setting unrealistic goals or expectations, there's going to be a breaking point to where a team's just going to snap and just like, nah, we're done. We can actually look at this in various NBA teams, whether it be the Cleveland Cavaliers, when LeBron came around for his second tour with the Cavs. And even releasing with the new Michael Jordan documentary, we actually got a chance to see that there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of negative effects based off of Jordan's unyielding and unrelenting need to win, because many of his teammates didn't share that type of at least that extreme level of competitiveness. Let's think about what we can do as coaches or as even some experienced athletes. Let's say you're a veteran on a team, or even if you're counseling or as a parent. How can we identify what perfectionism would look like in an athlete? Luckily, I kind of wrote down a couple things that always tend to be more of a standard effect that's pretty apparent. First thing is unrelenting pressure to meet one's own expectations or to meet others' expectations too. So first off, you have to ask yourself, okay, what is motivating this individual? Why are they striving for such to an extreme degree of excellence or a certain result? Why are they doing this? The next thing is that they have high standards to reach self-validation, and they need to be accepted. And the way they often think they need to be accepted is by performing well. So again, winning even a simple foot race, winning a free throwing competition, just anything. Like I said, if it's any little thing, they want to compete. And as professionals get into it, betting is a big part of this as well, but we'll talk about that later. And studies have found that perfectionism can lead into anxiety and performance anxiety over time. So it's kind of something we stated before, but there's just some more research about that. And then also extreme mood fluctuations are a big thing too. So you can have an individual who can be very calm, very, kind of, I don't want to say withdrawn, but more or less. And then let's say competition happens and then they are just so quick to anger right afterwards. Well, this extreme shift, it's understandable, but when we're constantly living in hot-cold phase, chances are that there's either some level of perfectionism going on or some other thing. So just something to take note of. Now, it is very important too, to where if you start to notice several side effects, either you as a coach can address this with the parents, just as with the athlete, or seek help with a counselor if need be too, okay? It's very important to understand what is your zone of capability. If you feel like you're not comfortable dealing with this type of subject, seek some help, okay? It's just very important. It's going to help everybody. So what are some strategies that coaches and, again, athletes can use to kind of help combat the negative effects of perfectionism? The first thing, and it's kind of a tried and true method, is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Oftentimes we try to find certain events or certain types of situations that bring about specific thoughts or feelings. And then through that understanding of, okay, if this happens, then I feel this way, or if this happens, I start thinking this way, we can start or deconstructing some of these thought processes to get a different emotion or different thought overall. However, again, if you're not well versed in CBT, that's one thing I would probably go see, go get some help if you can. Again, a counselor, a sports psychologist, somebody who's well versed into this type of training. The second thing that we can do is self-talk, right? So self-talk is critical for any athlete. You talk to any coach or any sports psychologist, we all understand the importance of self-talk, okay? It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, all right? Positive self-talk can help us change behavior, can help us change motivation, and also get us working more in a process orientation rather than just being caught up in the moment. It goes the same for negative self-talk though too. Those who often denigrate or speak negatively about themselves can have the effect of poor performance or any other type of side effects such as depression, anxiety, extreme mood swings. So self-talk is really critical, especially for understanding how the individual views himself. Think of, rather than I need to be perfect, to say, okay, I just need to do my best. I need to have a routine that I just can stick to or just do my best sticking to. Something like that. The next one is thought-stopping techniques. So a thought-stopping technique is kind of a mix of self-talk and CBT. What we want to do is that we want to help train the athlete who's showing tendencies towards perfectionism to understand when they are engaged in this mindset of having to be perfect, striving to be perfect. Once that individual is aware of when this can happen, then we have to somehow stop the process or just basically reintroduce a new thought or a new stimulus to change the direction. So this can be done many different ways. This can be done by physically just saying stop. It can also be, a relaxation technique to where you're changing your physiology. You could go out for a run. You could do something just to change the overall situation so we can change the thought. And over time, what's going to happen is that every time you have that negative thought and you do something to change it, it's not going to have the same effect as it originally did. So it's a type of reconditioning of the brain, more or less. And then the last one, this is going to be for coaches and parents too. The last one's going to be mastery-oriented environments. And essentially what this means is the type of environment we set up for our athletes is so critical when it comes to intrinsic or internal motivation. If we try to create a competitive environment to where all your athletes are trying to outperform one another and the coach is the alpha, okay, this is more of a traditional model of the coach is the alpha and then just goes down from there. Whatever the coach says, it happens, and there's very little to no input from the athletes. The coach can micromanage and say, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do, there's no way for the athlete to process or to, think through certain things. A mastery-oriented environment. So what does this mean? So as coaches and as parents as well, it's really critical that we create an environment that wants to foster intrinsic motivation in athletes. So we want to give them self-autonomous tasks. So we want them to be able to kind of process and think things through themselves. We don't want to micromanage a lot of athletes with small details. Now, as a coach, it's really important to set up a structure, but within that structure, we want to give the athletes the ability to kind of create and to play and to, feel and think certain processes out. Also too, what's really important is if we try to create a hyper-competitive environment, this is where we get perfectionism kind of spewing out on a regular basis. And again too, it's this hyper-competitiveness, this striving to be perfect to where you will get extreme results, and that extreme result is perfectionism. So really, I do encourage you as a coach or as a parent to see how you are interacting with your athlete or your child and really look at, okay, am I setting up certain parameters or certain conditions that need to be met, and I'm not giving them any leeway of, okay, how are you going to do it? Am I not asking for any input? Am I setting standards to where, he better outcompete this person, or, they better do a good thing at this and the other thing. Very extreme examples, but again, we want to make sure that we create a prosperous environment to where we want the individual to be autonomous and self-accepting. To go back to our last question, or to our original question, is perfectionism in sports a positive or a negative? Well, to answer it, it would be a negative. Based off of the research and also to the structure of perfectionism, it acts like a little bit like a double-edged sword, but realistically, it boils down to this. Perfectionism will allow you to win the battle. All right, so it gives you a high amount of energy, it gives you task-oriented, you set high standards, you set goals, and you're always trying to achieve excellence. Now, in the short term, that can be very productive. However, the long-term effects on that athlete of trying to be perfect can really, I'm not going to say damage, but can be a real negative thing for the individual. And again, it's our duty as coaches, as sports psychologists, as parents to protect the individual, protect the athlete. And we want to produce well-rounded human beings. And again, too, perfectionism based off of the research is probably not the best way to do that. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, there's a lot of information here. Please send me an email down below, and if you can, just smash that like button. All right, guys, talk to you later.